who have don't that's all right, who have donated and supported the foundation in the past, and those who continue to support over time, as a newer resident to Ottawa County. Truly, truly blessed and grateful to all of you for your support of the millages in the past and how we got our parks to this place right now, and all of the foundation uh, work that has been done to get us where we are now. So thank you all very, very much for your support. We have started a new program with the Ottawa County Parks Foundation, to kind of give back a little bit to our donors and their friends. We want to be able to give you some inside scoop, behind the scenes information so that you are kind of in the know on what's happening here with Ottawa County Parks. So we've started a new program called Parks and Purpose, which is what you are joining today. And from here, you will learn a bit more about a wide variety of different things. We'll have some programs will be webinars like this, some programs will be in person, but if you're not on our foundation mailing list, you'll want to click that link that Angela just put in the chat there to find our website, join our mailing list so that you can stay up to date on some of these opportunities to get a little more behind the scenes information on what's happening in parks and what's upcoming. So again, thank you all so much for your previous support of the foundation, which in turn supports your parks. And with that, I really want to jump right into our program here, which before we do that, want to make sure that we've got a couple housekeeping things here for Zoom. We just ask that you try to keep your microphones muted or off. And then just to let you know, feel free to put any questions or comments in the chat throughout the program. We will have a Q&A at the end of the session. So hold your questions for that or put them down in the chat and I'll make note of them so that we can get back to them. So to kick it off, we have Tyler here today. Tyler is going to share with us a bit more about the Connected County Park initiative. Tyler is a proud graduate of Kalamazoo College, where he obtained his BA in biology. His role with Ottawa County Parks is to work with staff to implement and oversee day-to-day restoration, forest health, and invasive species management fieldwork. Prior to joining Ottawa County Parks, he was a research biologist with the Kalamazoo Nature Center, where he studied the effects of varying management techniques on several natural communities and threatened and endangered species. Before that, he worked as a conservation technician, where he managed invasive species, conducted prescribed burns, and installed native plantings throughout Southwest Michigan. So, Tyler, thank you so much for taking some time away from the field and joining all of us today to share some more information with us.
Yeah, thanks. I am very happy to be indoors today. Okay, I will get my slides pulled up and then we will just get right into it. Okay, can you give me a thumbs up, Katie, if you can see my slides? Awesome. Okay. So to start off, I just want to give a little overview of what our Natural Resources Management Division does. It is pretty unique for a county park system to have their own division dedicated to conservation. Usually that falls on a lot of other staff members who aren't necessarily able to focus on that full time. So we've got 6 other amazingly talented staff. We work on forest health management, invasive species management, restoration projects, which would be like native plantings, shoreline restoration, prescribed fires, biological inventories, research and monitoring, and also some public programming too. So yeah, we've got, like I said, we're up to 7 staff total now, and we're pretty busy. We work in every park. And we always have a lot on our plates to to work on. So with that, we will get into today's topic, which is the Connected County Park Initiative. So first of all, I just want to preface this by saying I am proud to be presenting this today, but ultimately this is an effort of a much larger team, especially our community engagement team, who's a huge part of this. So just want to recognize that there are a lot of others who are on the call that are playing a huge role in this. So yeah, this is not something that we have put out to the public yet. It's been in the works for quite a while now, really developing the backbone of this, and we're got good momentum, and we're almost there, and we've got a lot of things in the works. So just to start us off, to frame our minds a little bit around today's topic, start off. So just want to ask everybody to take a few seconds. You can either close your eyes if you want, or you can leave them open and just imagine what nature is to you. Like, what does that bring to your mind when you hear the words nature? So feel free if you want, whatever comes to mind for you, you can drop that in the chat. I think for a lot of us, when we hear that, we're probably thinking of um, maybe an Ottawa County park. I think most of us probably a park setting. So thinking about nature, what sorts of images that brings to mind for most of us. This is Hemlock Crossing Park. So beautiful forest there. That's one of our best examples of a forested area. All of our lakeshore properties that we have in our parks. So this is Rosie Mound for all the Grand Haven folks that are on the call today. Stearns Bayou. So this is, one of our, or at least my favorite wetland in our park system. The taller grass that you see here is actually a state threatened species of wild rice that is very abundant in Stearns Bayou. And then we've got Grand River Park. So there's a gorgeous restored grassland there. And what I want to get at, by asking you to picture that and sort of getting at our perceptions of nature, I want to challenge that today, and ultimately through this initiative, sort of redefining how we see ourselves relative to nature. So often it's somewhere else. It's somewhere that we go to when we're recreating or we want to go for a hike, but it's something that's separate from us. It's somewhere we go and then we leave and we come back to our homes. And those two, nature and our homes are sort of separated. So that is just to kind of preface what we're going to talk about today and kind of get us thinking from that perspective. But we'll start off talking about our parks. These are just a few examples of the gorgeous parks that we have in our system. So I really want to dig into the ecology of these parks to start off and talk about what sort of aspects these parks offer. So a couple things to preface this slide. So we're going to talk about ecological services, which is a term that describes sort of what ecosystems provide. Typically, this is discussed in a human context, so what ecosystems are providing to humans. But I also want to say there's a lot to be said about conserving nature just for nature's sake and the inherent value of nature, not just conserving nature for human's sake. But the talk today is focused on interaction between humans and nature. So that's what we're going to focus on. But I wanted to just say that first. And also, this is a lot to go over in just a couple minutes. So I'll go through each one of these, talk quickly, but just know that you could spend days talking about ultimately what all of these parks and these natural areas offer to us. So that said, talk about air purification. So forests, old growth forests are often referred to as the lungs of the earth. We might not always think of it as a living system, but ultimately our planet is its own living system. It breathes, it inhales carbon dioxide, exhales oxygen, so opposite of us. And that is done through photosynthesis. So not only do plants and natural areas provide us with the oxygen that we need to breathe, they can also absorb and remove pollutants. So things like ozone, sulfur dioxide, they can even trap particulate matter on leaf surfaces. So if you think of all the smoke that we were having a few years back from specifically Canadian wildfires, leaf surfaces have little tiny hairs called trichomes, and they can actually trap that particulate matter in the leaves and take that out of the air. So we're relying on these areas to purify the air that we breathe every minute of every day. Water regulation, think about the root system. So deep root systems, what they do as they grow down is they create little air pockets around the root structure, and that allows water to actually penetrate the soil and drain down and absorb. Whereas if you have, you don't have those deep and intricate root systems in there, what happens a lot of times the water can't actually get down into the soil because it's so compacted, and so it just runs off the surface and ultimately washes that surface away, creating erosion. So having vegetation, just all the leaves and the stems and tree canopies, when heavy rain is falling, what it does is slows that rainfall and it intercepts it, and it slowly absorbs all that and soaks it in, rather than again, if you just had like a field of bare soil, all that rainfall is going to hit it at once, and it doesn't really have that slow filtering down. Um, Roots also trap, sediment and pollutants as the water is soaking down and restoring our aquifers. So not only are these natural areas and parks um, capturing this water so it doesn't just run off into rivers and watersheds, but it's filtering it as it's putting it back into the ground. So we rely on these these areas for our air, clean water, and that leads us to biodiversity support. So really, all wildlife needs natural areas of some sort. Think about like nectar, pollen, fruit, leaves, seeds. Plants provide these, and everything that's not a plant can't produce its own energy, and so it's dependent on these sources of food to sustain their lives, really. So habitat as well, and then a big one is host plants and thinking about specialist insects. So I included a monarch on the slide intentionally because monarchs can only utilize a few species for their caterpillar host plants. In this area of the country, that is milkweeds. So if you don't have milkweed, caterpillars can't survive, and you're not going to have adult butterflies. I always use that as an example because it is a familiar one. Um, but over 80% of insects are specialists, just like monarchs. There are only a few particular plant species or groups of species that insects can use to survive. And so, without biodiverse communities of, diverse plant species, you're not going to get the insects and ultimately everything else that depends on those insects for survival. Couple more, I'll try to go through these a little bit quicker. Pollination services. So we don't always think of, how does a park support our food system? Well, most, if not all, fruits and vegetables require insect pollination. So we typically, especially in this area of the country, a lot of times honeybees will be brought in to pollinate. But studies have shown that, greater than or equal to 50% of pollination, and it depends on the crop, is done not by the honeybees that we're bringing in, but by wild bees. So this industry that's tens of billions of dollars annually in the US, half of it is supported by wild pollinators that, one, we don't pay for, but two, nobody's asking them to do that either. They're looking for food sources. Most often they're gonna live in parks and natural areas because these crops only bloom once a year, and so the rest of the year they still need food, and so they're kind of relying on those natural areas. But we're also benefiting from that. Native bees can fly in colder weather, and they're active for much longer than honeybees. And honeybees are also seeing the mysterious colony collapse disorder, which is wiping out large hives. And ultimately, we can't depend on honeybees alone. So all that is to say that these parks are holding up systems of pollinators that are ultimately holding up our entire food system. Or at least, fruits and vegetables that are insect pollinated. So last couple on here, temperature regulation. The shade from plants is cooling. They transpire, release water vapor into the air, which cools the air. And there are significant temperature differences in areas that are forested versus non-forested, especially in an urban context. Noise reduction, branches and leaves disperse and absorb sound waves, so they're great sound barriers, naturally occurring sound barriers. Waste decomposition, so all the organic waste that we have, like leaf litter and everything, is cycled back into the soil. Even farmable soil that we can use to grow our food. Carbon sequestration, taking it out of the air and putting it into the soil through the roots. Plant material like trees, big woody stems, and then also ultimately returning it to the soil where it's stable. And then mental and physical health, I put that one on there. It's not quite an ecological service, but think about our parks, the recreation, hiking, kayaking, that's encouraging so much physical activity, which is great for us. We already talked about cleaner air, cleaner water, but also think about the stress reduction, the social connection, the healing element that nature provides to us. And then there's also a lot of research about the importance of natural areas for child development. So these parks are really sustaining healthier lives for us on a whole lot of levels. So with that, I just want to share one more slide here to talk about or to just sort of enhance what we already talked about. So these are the root systems of prairie plants that are common to our region. So if you talked about water filtration and carbon storage in the soil, things like that. I mean, look at these root systems. You have this compass plant on the left here down to 15-foot long roots on that. And if you haven't found it already, see if you can find Kentucky bluegrass, which is probably what your lawn consists of if you have a typical turf grass lawn in this part of the country. So all the way to the left on this diagram is Kentucky bluegrass, and look at that root system compared to all of our native plants here that comprise the rest of the diagram. So, and this is a diagram, but this is real life. This is a root system from a bunch grass, a prairie species of bunch grass. And this is what, the difference we're going to talk about, differences between non-native landscaping and native landscaping. And ultimately, this is, no pun intended, this is at the root of it and what we're going to talk about. So non-native landscape. So we just talked about parks, natural areas. We're managing these areas for biodiversity. We're managing invasive species. So our parks are largely native plant communities. So what do non-native landscapes, what effect do those have on our environment? So they're displacing native habitat and the very ecosystem or ecological services that we just talked about, introducing potentially aggressive non-native species. Barberry comes to mind. It leads to increases in monocultures, impervious landforms. So that is, turf grass. We just talked about the root systems. When there's heavy rainfall, that rain cannot penetrate into the soil and it can't soak into the soil. So with turf grass, generally you're going to get a lot of runoff into storm drains and ultimately our watersheds, and it's going to take with it the chemical fertilizer and the pesticides that it often requires to have a nice, lush green lawn. So overuse of water resources as well, when we think about watering lawns, especially with the past 2 summers that we've had, we're talking thousands, millions of gallons of water just to keep these turf grass landscapes green. When those, a 15-foot root system ultimately can get its own water. You don't need to water native plants because they're adapted to this climate. That's why they have such large root systems. And so when you replace those with turf grass, you're bringing in a demand for a lot more water. Just so a caveat to that too, a lot of the areas in the county where we have a lot of great, homes and subdivisions popping up, they are replacing agriculture, which actually uses less water than a neighborhood that's watering its grass regularly. And so as these areas pop up and in these agricultural landscapes, the demand of water is also increasing very quickly. So collectively, all these are leading to widespread ecological harm, global losses of biodiversity, and ultimately the degradation of our air and water. So in Ottawa County specifically, roughly 4,000 acres a year are being converted to developed land over the last 5 years. And I want to be clear too, I'm not saying that this is good or bad, that developing land is good or bad. I'm just stating that we are losing natural area and along with it some of the ecological services that those natural areas were providing. So about a third of Ottawa County at this point remains classified as undeveloped habitat. Preserved land in Ottawa County, in a large part because of our park system, did rise from only 1% up to 4% over the past few decades, but that is nowhere near keeping pace with the rates of land conversion. So that tells us that ultimately we're going to need alternative methods for restoration and for land preservation to offset these ecological services that we're losing along with those natural areas. Okay. So there's one more ecological concept that I want to hit on, and then we're going to get into the bones of the initiative here. So thinking about island ecology. So there are a lot of ecological processes that happen differently on islands. And in this case, originally it was developed as actual islands, like a volcanic island or continental island. Typically, because these are isolated from the mainland where the majority of species occur, you get a much higher rate of extinction on islands. You also have restricted movement of wildlife and plant species, along with their genetics. We don't always think about genetics as biodiversity, but if you think about in a large population, you're going to have a variety of, say, cold tolerance within that genetic pool. So you can get, say you have a really cold year, maybe the portion that didn't have those cold resistant genes might die off, but you still have a large pool that did survive, and they're going to go on to keep that species going. So when you have a limited gene flow and you have isolated islands, you start to lose that genetic diversity, and that can accelerate local extinctions. So we can apply this island ecology idea to parks as well. So if you look at this map of the county parks, you'll see our county parks and our county open spaces, and you'll notice that they really are like their own islands. There is a lot of white space in between the parks. About half of the surface area in Ottawa County is agriculture, but a large majority are, residential areas as well. So we can apply this island ecology idea to our parks, and that provides a new lens to see how ultimately this stress increases, where we're placing more and more ecological stress on these little islands that are remaining. And as we remove more natural area, the stress on those remaining areas increase. So that makes them less resilient to disturbance and more vulnerable to human impacts. So we'll take a look at a couple examples too to provide some more context for this. So Grosse Park, all the way in the northeast part of the county. This is largely an agricultural landscape. This is Crockery Lake here down in the bottom left corner of the photo, which is the home of the famous alligator sighting last summer. So Grosse Park is, surrounded by these areas of row crop. And so we can think about, let's say, water runoff, because ultimately all this water that hits this surface is going to drain into the lake, and it's going to make its way through Grosse Park. So, 300 years ago, 400 years ago, these areas would have just been vast natural landscapes that can all sort of soak in the water equally. Agriculture generally is, you could consider that an impervious surface, and you get a lot of runoff. And because of that, Grosse Park is going to have a lot more ecological stress on it when you think about all the water that's running into that system. And we have seen that with the creek that runs through that property is getting washed out and digging deeper and deeper because of these big flood events from the surrounding area washing through right into that park. So can also think about, in this context, deer browse. So deer do like, cornfields, things like that sustains them for part of the year. But what happens when all that gets buried in snow? They're going to move to forested areas and start browsing on woody vegetation. So if you think about this whole image here, all this surface area may be sustaining a herd of deer that then have to concentrate in this one forested area. And what we actually see in Michigan and especially in Ottawa County is areas of forest that aren't regenerating because of heavy browse pressures. So that's one example. And then the last one we'll talk about, I saw we had somebody from Jenison on the call. So this is Hager Park, which, take a look at this landscape around it. One thing I wanna touch on is this is up here, on the northwest corner of the park where we have a restored grassland. Look at these neighborhoods and look at all of the green turf grass that in theory could be converted into some habitat. So this is kind of what I was trying to touch on at the beginning too, is you have this idea of our homes are over here and then nature is somewhere else over here. And there's a clear distinction between those. And I think Hager Park illustrates that well. And similar stories with runoff and things from all this impervious surface, both the roads as well as the non-native landscapes are going to be pressuring those parks. So we got all the ecology out of the way. that brings us back to where we started, which ultimately is how we see ourselves as part of the landscape that we live in. We can't depend on parks. We are gonna ultimately need to have a role in sustaining these ecosystems, um, because we're reaping the benefits of these areas while at the same time some of them are being replaced with non-functioning areas. So how can we bring nature home to us? How do we connect our homes with park systems, both ecologically, and also socially and on an emotional level? If you think about the relaxation and the solace that nature provides us, what if you could bring a piece of that to your home and start reintegrating ourselves with these natural areas and start giving back to them? So that is ultimately what this initiative gets at, and now we're going to talk about how we're going to accomplish that. So can we redefine how we think of nature? So this house actually belongs to one of our staff members here in county parks, and I think this is just a gorgeous example of what a native landscape can look like. So you can see this planting prior to this restoration. This whole yard was turf grass. So they put in a path, they planted plugs of a variety of native species, and you can see ultimately turned into a gorgeous native planting that's going to be sustaining a lot of pollinators. Think about the difference in the yard next to it and this yard with how much water it can soak up and absorb and return to aquifers. Um, can we redefine our homes and think of our homes as parts of the ecosystems, um, and think of them as almost mini nature preserves, or a personal nature preserve? So we can restore connectivity, thinking about our parks as islands. We can restore that connectivity and resilience through corridors consisting of restoration efforts on private land. So I did a little bit of math. We have roughly 300,000 residents in Ottawa County. So let's say that each person was responsible for one section that they're going to maintain as a native area. So we can start from the bottom, just 1 square foot, which is a plant or two. If everybody planted 1 square foot and maintained that, it would equal about 7 acres across the county, which would not be our smallest park actually. So we bump that up to a 5 foot by 5 foot area. That leads up to 172 acres of park area added. A 10 by 10 area is almost 700 acres, which I would have to double check with the new Bend area expansion, but I think that would make it our largest park with just a 10 by 10 area, which is, even smaller than what you see here featured in this photo. 25 foot by 25 foot, maybe not manageable for most of us. But let's say hypothetically that was possible, 4,000 acres, that's over half the size of our park system. And then 50 by 50 foot area would be almost 20,000 acres. So ultimately that won't be realistic for most of us, but if you think about schools and there are tens of thousands of acres of mowed area in schools alone in Ottawa County. So when it averages out, I think this is more than realistic for total acreages that we could expect across the county. So a lot of obstacles to that. Lack of awareness, lack of skills and technical knowledge. What I'm hearing more and more is that there are a lot of people that want to get into native landscaping and they want to make those efforts, but they just don't know how. There's too much to it. There's a lot of social pressure to have a nicely manicured, mowed lawn. And then ultimately, one of the biggest obstacles is the financial cost of native plants and native seed. So there are a lot of barriers that are holding back a large population of folks that want to get involved with these efforts. And that is where this initiative comes in, is to eliminate those barriers and empower everyone to, or at least everyone interested, to start restoring some native areas. So this expands the homegrown national park model. This model for land management is not my own personal idea. If you're familiar with Doug Tallamy, he wrote Nature's Best Hope and more recently Bringing Nature Home. And in those, he features the idea of a homegrown national park, which talks about the same concepts that we discussed today. Integrating private land into ecological stewardship. It applies a model, a social psychology model called the 6 Sources of Influence to inspire and motivate the behaviors that we want to see, which is ultimately planting more native plants. Provides motivation, skill development, resources, technical assistance, and along with that, leadership and a larger framework for collaboration across the region with many partners who are involved in this effort. So there's sort of 3 facets to the connection here. We chose that name intentionally because not only do we want to connect isolated pieces of land, we also want to reconnect people with the land that they live on and connect people with people by creating a community that revolves around environmental stewardship in Ottawa County. So through this initiative, we'll see improved connectivity between not just our parks, but all the ecosystems in Ottawa County. Ideally invasive-free buffer zones around our parks, which will reduce the inputs of invasive species that are happening in our parks. It will increase the acreage restored and managed by Ottawa County Parks, sort of by proxy. Ultimately, and this is the longer battle, is changing status quos in society and inspiring these efforts both statewide, and I would argue that we can be an example nationwide as well for a sustainable life ways and how to reintegrate private lands with the ecosystems that they exist within. So water quality, that's a huge one. Aquifer sustainability as well. And so I'm only going to spend a couple seconds on this one for the sake of time. But the 6 Sources of Influence model, essentially we built the bones of this by looking at different ways to target behavior on both on a personal, social, and structural level, and then thinking about both motivation, how do we inspire motivation, and then ability, how can we help improve the ability for to get the behavior that we want to see. So let's talk about motivation. So this initiative is going to involve a interactive county map that would show all of the enrolled land. So if you think about the map I showed earlier of our parks, all that white space over time, in theory, we'll see that start to fill in and see that connectivity restored visually across the county. We want to start a branded yard sign program. So areas with native plantings could receive a Connected County Park yard sign that will contain some information about the program, talk about that habitat value, and with that branding, hopefully, again, that'll contribute to building a community around this so that everyone can feel like they're part of a larger effort. We're looking to, and I'm just going to highlight a few of these on each slide because this, there's a lot of components to this. But we want to produce, documentary or some sort of promotional videos that will help educate and inspire some of these efforts as well. Education and skill development. This is a big one. If you from the conversations I've had with a lot of folks getting into native landscaping, there's the idea of drinking from a fire hose because there's so many resources, there's so many options, and that is one of the biggest barriers to getting started is there's too much possibility. It's too complex, and so how do we make it straightforward? How do we leverage the the decades of professional experience within our staff in our division? How do we leverage that and streamline that communication to residents? So we're going to hold workshop series on things like site preparation, landscape design, planting, maintenance, basically teach every step that's required through hands-on experience. We'll continue to expand education and programming, and at some point we'd like to have a monthly webinar series that will cover something that you can do at every point in the year. Technical assistance. So we're going to set up a hotline where you could email or potentially make a phone call and just get a straight answer, because when you try to find your own answers on the internet, it can get really complicated. And so if there are questions on what species should I plant, or how can I make this design look a little bit better, we're want to be there to answer those questions. And so we'll have that available for folks. We're going to build a video tutorial library that demonstrates all the skills required to do this, potential site visit guidance for things like schools and larger projects, learning modules, a Facebook group where others who are joining in this effort can talk about their progress. They can share tips and tricks. And then another barrier is lawn height restrictions and language surrounding what your yard needs to look like. That can be on the township level, or like an HOA often has restrictions on lawn height. And so we want to work to add some language potentially about native plants in those areas. Supplies and resources. I talked about cost already. A native plant at a typical native plant sale can cost anywhere from $3 to $5 for an individual plant, which is going to cover about 1 square foot. So when we're talking, a 50-foot by 50-foot area, that can add up very quickly. Same with native seed, there's limited supply and it can get expensive. So we want to start a Seeds for Stewards program that would provide seed to people who apply for it. We want to make it low barrier, but also ensure that they've done adequate site prep and it's the right seed mix for the right area. So there would be some sort of application process, but we want to provide seed as well as plugs through our native greenhouse, which is going on its 2nd year. We also want to provide equipment caches called restoration stations, where you could come in and rent equipment. A lot of folks don't want to buy equipment just to use it once. And so if we set these up around the county, you could come in, get the equipment that you need and return it when you're done. So another one is ready to use templates for these plantings, because it's very hard to design your own. And we're actually working on that right now, designing an official Ottawa County pollinator patch, which will be a 5-foot by 5-foot standard planting, which will make it very easy to implement some of these. And so what's next? A lot of these things are in motion. They've been in motion for a while, and we're finally getting some concrete things in place. And so we're hoping to run this through our Parks Commission soon, within the next few months. And then ideally in mid-April, we're looking at potentially having a sort of public launch event that'll give, a talk and have some other resources and things available. So that's where we're at currently, sort of utilizing this cold weather and maximizing our office work to get these things done. And I mentioned workshops. We have our first, it won't be an official Connected County Park workshop, but we are hosting a DIY winter sewing workshop at Hemlock Crossing on Thursday, February 12th. So we capped it at 24 spots and it's already over half full. But if anyone is interested in growing their own native plants, come learn how to do that. So that is all I've got. My contact info is there, and Katie can share that out as well afterwards. But with that, we will go on to questions.
Tyler, thank you so much. That was some absolutely amazing information. And as Tyler alluded to, you all are getting a very early kind of sneak peek at what is progressing, what is hoping to come as some additional services from Ottawa County Parks and the tremendously talented resource management team that we have here. And you definitely took us on an amazing journey, Tyler, from like understanding the kind of island atmosphere that our county parks have and the struggle that that can create when those little islands of our parks are meant to do all of these ecological services that we benefit from, to the amazing hopeful pieces of and then doable chunks, 1 by 1 or 5 by 5, like some. So there were parts of your presentation where I was like, oh my gosh, oh really, oh okay, what are we going to do, how are we going to manage this? And you really brought it around to show us that it can be, and we as individuals can take some action there to make this really possible, to expand the footprint of the benefits of our county parks and other parks too. So we do want to open up for questions. Please feel free to chat a question in the chat here, make a comment. Thank you, Scott, for joining us. Some great information. I have a question for you, Tyler. You kind of mentioned that, it can be a 1 by 1 area or a 5 by 5 area. And, some of us don't have an actual lawn to really work with, and you mentioned kind of HOA guidelines and things like that. So if I'm in an apartment, or I'm, have restrictions on what I can do. And if it's an HOA or other restrictions, sometimes that's a long process to get any of those things changed. But say I want to start doing something this summer or next summer, what can I do? What are your recommendations to somebody who's got a little less space and a little more restrictions? What would you recommend?
Yeah, so that is a great question. We're actually, one of my stewardship technicians, Megan, is working on producing a guide for container gardening, for, beneficial insects. So you could use planters or containers even on your porch, and you can just plant a few of these host species, say milkweed or goldenrod. Very easy to grow. You can grow them in containers. I was at a talk recently, and somebody had a photo from downtown Chicago. There was a bar with outdoor seating, and along the fence railing, they had planters with milkweed, and there was a monarch caterpillar on that milkweed that they were sitting next to. And this is downtown Chicago, just a little planter outside of a bar. If you provide it, nature will find a way in. These insects are gonna find it and they're gonna start using it. So yeah, that's it. This is as low barrier as possible. Even just 1 square foot is our minimum for native habitat. So for in that context, yeah, if you have a little planter or a container, just pick, it can be one species, it can be one milkweed plant, or it can be one goldenrod plant. And so you can start with that and you can go from there. There are also a lot of smaller, shorter plants that are just as beneficial, and aren't going to be, you could say, unsightly, I guess, within the context of a more groomed area. So yeah, that would be my feedback for those.
Awesome. And that does seem more doable. And I never thought about milkweed in a pot. So that right there, I'm like, okay, I know I can do something. I know I can do a little bit there. I do want to get to our chat, and we do have a couple questions there. Um, Rick has a question about plots in parks, such as Hager.
Yeah, so I think what you're getting at, Rick, is maybe some plots that people could come and manage and almost adopt, is a native habitat. And if that's the case, I mean, we do have our Adopt a Park program, which is larger scale, but I could certainly see that, scaling down to almost like a micro level of adopted areas, and I think that would be awesome. We have a lot of parks where we're doing grassland restoration and things where we need help managing those, especially some of our plantings and parking lot islands and things like that. And those would be, very well suited for somebody to adopt if they don't have space at home, but they still want to contribute. They could manage those areas there. I think that would be awesome. And not just county parks either. It could be, you could talk to your workplace or a community center or a library or a church or something, somewhere you go frequently that you might want to utilize, if you aren't able to do that on your own property. I think there are a lot of options where you could set those up.
We've got a question from Nick as well. And his question is there a more native turf grass that has deeper root system we could use to overseed lawn areas in and places where we can't do a typical native planting? I was thinking about that too as we were talking about some of the park spaces or lawn spaces where you you need a shorter grass. You want to be able to have play fields for kids. You want to be able to have, a shorter grass that you can kind of enjoy in that way. But is there something you mentioned that the Kentucky bluegrass or is that turf grass? And that root system being so incredibly short, is there a turf grass that has deeper root systems? Or maybe this is something to kind of look in for future, but yeah.
Yeah, so there are certainly options. Unfortunately, most of the grasses, the native grasses that are truly native to Michigan, are what we call bunch grasses. So instead of growing in a flat, consistent area, they typically grow in a tall, circular style where you would get those scattered throughout in these little, almost like mounds. But there are certainly grass species that are native to like Illinois, Indiana. Actually, on that slide I had, the species all the way to the right is called buffalo grass, and that is used in that exact context. So you can use things like buffalo grass or fescues. It's a type of grass is commonly used. There's, species that we call low mow, which means they grow very slowly. So even if you want turf grass, but lawnmower engines are some of the worst types of engines in terms of emissions. They're also expensive to maintain. So if you only want to mow a couple times a year, you could plant a low mow fescue, which is going to look a lot like traditional turf grass, but much deeper root system and, much slower growing. You're not going to need to water it as much. So that's native-ish alternative to turf grass in a sense would be like a fescue or a buffalo grass.
It's awesome. And thank you so much to William, who popped some more information in the chat and put a little link there to a fescue mix. So awesome, William. Thank you. That's super helpful. So, you know, as I mentioned before, Ottawa County Parks Foundation is here to support Ottawa County Parks and all the amazing work. We're bringing you all in super early to something that is coming up, is hopefully coming up as deeper programs and deeper opportunities for you to get engaged. If this is something you're super excited about and want to learn more ways on how to support the Connected County Park Initiative or other programs in the park, please don't hesitate to reach out to Ottawa County Parks Foundation. We are happy to help find ways to support the things that you are really passionate about with your parks. You can visit the website there that has just popped up. Thank you, Angela. Or visit the QR code that will give you more ways to get involved with the foundation, who is in existence to support your county parks. So Tyler, thank you so much for your time. All of you who have joined us today, please stay tuned for more information on this. We will have another program next month on February 20th, where you'll be talking with Curtis Dykstra. He'll be doing a virtual birding program where we're going to go in deep on our bald eagles and learn a bit more about those. So watch your Ottawa County Parks Foundation newsletter for more details on that, so you can register for that program as well. And then we do, as this is Parks and Purpose is a new program for the Ottawa County Parks Foundation. We really appreciate your feedback. Really want to know a bit more about do you like this type of programming where you get an insider's scoop, where you get to learn a little bit more from some of our amazing park folks? We've got a link in the chat there to a survey. We'd really appreciate your feedback on how you enjoyed this program and some other topics you'd like to know a little bit more about. So please take a minute to fill that out so that we can learn a bit more about what you all want and need. And again, just thank you so much for joining us on this sunny January day. And I hope you all stay warm out there. And please don't hesitate to reach out to Angela or myself if you have any questions about Ottawa County Parks Foundation. And we can also get you connected with Tyler if you'd like to learn more about Connected County Parks and all that natural resource management team here at Ottawa County Parks is doing. So thank you all so much. Enjoy your Friday. Stay warm out there, folks.